Welcome to Masters of Business, a show that gives you real-world techniques, cutting-edge strategies, and extraordinary insights for managers and leaders who want to develop the business acumen needed to go faster and farther in their business careers. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Welcome back, everyone. As many of you know, I've created the show Masters of Business to help people on their leadership journey, and they are leveraging, hopefully, the core constructs of business acumen. Some of the things that I've learned is that not everybody knows what business acumen is, and on my company's website, business-acumen.com, there's a link there to what I call the Business Acumen Canvas, which will provide some information to you. Anyway, this show, Masters of Business, is available through normal podcast channel like Apple Podcasts and stuff like that, as well as on YouTube. So we are video and live. Anyway, so today I'm speaking with Jon Clarine, and I've known Jon for a long time. Weird. Anyway, but he's in charge of digital services for TK Elevator, and his career is steeped in digital technology, whether it's at TK or at GE. And the digital age is here. Companies are transforming themselves incessantly. You know, sometimes I feel like if I hear the word transformation again, it's a little too much, right? But what's interesting is we're going to talk about communication today. And the interesting thing is what started it had to do with a conversation about PowerPoint. Anyway, that said, Jon, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Great. So let's talk about that thing with PowerPoint. What the heck were we talking about? And PowerPoint and leadership? What was that?
Well, I get a kick out of the conversation because PowerPoint is a topic that, you know, from my point of view and from my experience, is really good and bad. And generally speaking, it tends to have a negative connotation. And I think that stems from the fact that, especially in middle management and above, in leadership and executive positions, people use PowerPoint maybe far too much in their day-to-day. And sometimes I believe that, you know, PowerPoint can become the outcome, which is a negative connotation with PowerPoint, when really you're only trying to communicate a message about business. However, you know, I think the story I shared with you was my first experience really with PowerPoint at an executive level. I wasn't an executive, but I had just come out of the field. I was, you know, working prior to that in the field doing, you know, field engineering type work and in application engineering situations. PowerPoint was not really a tool used in the field. So when I took my first role in a headquarters position at GE, in fact, and I remember going to my first board meeting, which was a massive meeting across the entire power generations division, lots of business units, a lot of report outs, fast fire, and one senior executive really trying to digest all this information. I remember leaving that meeting thinking that I wasn't going to be able to make the cut in headquarters or do the job whatsoever, because I couldn't really follow along as fast as the rest of the room was following. And nor could I ever build a PowerPoint that looked that looked that good, let's say, very quickly. So I thought, man, this is just not cut out for me. But I realized after some time that PowerPoint was almost a language. It was a means to communicate to the senior leader quickly, graphically. The senior leader in this situation, you know, was in reviews on a routine graphics together that he automatically understood and knew inherently, you know, what the X and Y axis meant without having to ask. And that's because it was a language that they all spoke to quickly get information about business transferred so they could make, you know, timely decisions. And I think, you know, PowerPoint is one of those necessary evils in that regard, because it is a ubiquitous tool that is an easy way to to summarize some ideas and thoughts and qualitatively communicate, numbers and financials that matter in decision making.
It's really compelling. And I mean, I have, when I think about PowerPoint and I think about communication, part of me says, yeah, it's sort of like this common language, whatever it is. And now we have like Miro boards and other tools that are, maybe more engaging, but it's still the idea is you're putting stuff, figures and tables and whatever onto a table, onto some, two-dimensional format, and generally sharing it with other people, which is, I guess, digital. But one of the things that I do in my workshops, which is interesting, is we get so lost in PowerPoint sometimes that it becomes the de facto. It's like the bullet point becomes the law. I know it sounds a little extreme, but it's what's lost is really the story, right? It's that,
yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's that idea that it's the narrative of what happened and how people assimilate their ideas and their insights that I think can make a compelling story that can be more easily communicated, and also to demonstrate a person's, depth of knowledge or understanding on a topic, which I think is lost sometime in PowerPoint.
Yes, agree 100%. And all of the old, corporate training and professional training that I've taken around presentations, remind you always to tell the story, tell the narrative, use the PowerPoint as a visual aid to nail points or communicate something quantitatively that is difficult to do verbally. But don't forget that you're the presenter, you're delivering the message. And one of my favorite tools in PowerPoint is the B button, when you can press B in the middle of a presentation mode and go black with the screen, and all eyes come to you. And I think, when you need to tell a story and make a point, that's very effective. And so PowerPoint, again, on the negative side, can become a crutch all too often, and the storytelling piece gets lost. And that's just always an opportunity for improvement, even for me today, frankly.
When I demonstrate this, when I'm standing in front of a room and whether doing a workshop or a talk, I will blank the slide. And you notice the behavior in the room, right? How people will look at you and that you get to draw them into the conversation. People may be less inclined to converse when their heads are straight forward and you're almost like an object on the side of the room. But this is the topic of communication. And everywhere I have ever read or studied about leadership and business acumen and all these other things, people are always talking about you have to be a great communicator. And there's so many different styles and techniques. But is there, I'd like to ask you from your point of view, like what helps a person become an effective communicator, especially as an evolving leader or a leader trying to fine-tune their craft?
Boy, there's a lot to that answer. I mean,
totally. I totally stacked the deck for you.
Well, off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind is knowing your audience. And I think internally, when you're talking to business executives and you're thinking in terms of business acumen, right, you need to be able to be very concise and quick. You also need to understand their understanding, or lack of understanding is probably more important, because you're working on something 8 hours a day or more. You're in the details, whereas senior leaders are not. And depending on how high that senior leader is, the less they are in the details. So you need to be able to answer their questions quickly and succinctly. I remember some training I received a long time ago, such that, when a senior executive is asking a question of you, you should be able to give them a 1 or 2 sentence response, almost a yes or no to begin with, and allow them to ask a question deeper to expand on that. But don't over communicate, because you can lose your audience. And I think the audience is important, not just with regards to obviously the executive community you might be speaking to, but also to the larger organization, your peer structure, your customers, knowing their understanding where they're coming from, and the appetite for what they need to know is probably one of the most important pieces to communication. Of course, using the tools and the basics of like we talked about with PowerPoint and visual aids to make your point cleanly and succinctly and not over communicating is helpful too. But if I were to think of the number one thing that comes to my mind, it's knowing the audience.
As you were talking, I was thinking about innovators and inventors and people who are creative and developers and stuff, and how, the ones that tend to be very successful, they may not have the verbal or even sometimes the written skills. Sometimes they're using a model or a prototype or something else to convey a story, but they are the messenger. It's almost like I'm a messenger from the market. I've translated all these sort of ideas into something, and here's what it is, and here's how I got to this conclusion. What do you think it looks like? And you can get to show people inside your company and get to show customers and stuff like that. It's another way to model communication, right?
Yes, you mean almost a show and tell.
Yeah, of course.
So to speak. Yep, absolutely. In fact, we're doing that next week.
Are you?
In order to really make a new technology real for some of our branches here in TKE, we're going to bring a demo unit. We're going to do more demonstrations, especially in the areas of digital where we've got new technologies doing different things in an old market, which means that there's new words, there's new language, there's new business models. The topics are new to the industry when we talk about APIs and extensions of data and information, like we're doing in TKE, where we're really one of the leaders with IoT on vertical transportation. That type of technology, hits a lot more home when you're showing and demonstrating it. So we're taking a kit to the branches. We're plugging it in. We're lighting it up. We're making phone calls with it, as an example, for emergency services. And that's just, to your point, Stephen, a way to really make it more real. Get off the PowerPoint in this case.
Yeah, again, this is why I love having these conversations, and especially for the fire engines outside, because we are in New York City, so that's part of the deal. But when you talked about, we're in a mature industry and we're talking about these new technologies and new ways, an interface between a customer or a user needs to be communicated, right? And I can't tell you how many crappy apps I've used that they're supposed to be intuitive and deliver a great user experience, and they suck. not to say, I mean, some do a great experience, but communicating change, like, how does it get there? And how do you put people into an informed state? Meaning that communication not only exists inside of your own organization, but to the customers of your company. That can be really an interesting way of looking at things, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think, when, especially in the space that I'm working, which is digital, a lot of the services that we're offering here and in the past companies I've worked in, that information is being transmitted in new and different ways, as you brought up an app, and that communication is a product now, right? That information in near real time, for example. Here in the elevator industry, with an IoT connection on an elevator, we can communicate to a customer, a professional property manager, that an elevator, has changed its state, has gone to an out of service state or a return to service state. That helps a property manager keep, in tune with their building. Now, that's not something that before IoT, and really the majority of buildings, across the world right now are not IoT connected. Really, IoT is something that's come to prominence in the last 5 years. So the majority of the buildings out there are not connected. So business as usual has been, an elevator breaks down, a tenant, experiences that breakdown, calls the property manager because there's long wait times at the elevator lobby. They call the service technician. They're dispatched. They have to get there and usually do an exchange when they're doing troubleshooting. That's the normal way of the normal workflow of a breakdown. And that's not unique to elevators. A lot of equipment follows that same workflow. With technology now, the interface becomes live, near real-time IoT, pushing information directly off the controller into the hands of both the technician and the property manager in near real time. Now that has value. That has value that needs to be communicated. And that value is new and different. It's a changing of the legacy way of handling an outage for a piece of equipment that's very meaningful. And what does it do? It cuts down on downtime. it results in more uptime. And at the end of the day, that's what tenants are looking for, property managers are looking for, and that new value and that data stream, again, like you said, is a different communication from a sales perspective, as well as, when you bring it up, a developer's perspective.
Obviously, again, not a secret that I live in New York City, but I was waiting for a bus yesterday, believe it or not. And at the bus stop, there was the first time I had ever seen a sign, a digital sign that said, crosstown bus, blah, blah, coming in 2 minutes. And in the subways, they've been adding signs for a couple of years. And in the airports, they've been doing things. And we now live in this digital world, which enables and fosters communication. So we have to have both the means and the message, from my point of view, in order to engage both inside and outside of the organization. And I think, when it comes down to leadership, you've got to be able to promote that. You have to promote it. You have to demonstrate it to other people with whom you work. You have to demonstrate it. It's almost like you're living the capability, as opposed to telling people they have to do the capability. Right, which is, I think, part of the essence of leadership. And there are probably a couple of clues that you've had in your life that have been helpful, whether it's conversations. I know we've talked about conversations with your dad and stuff like that. But I'd like to just go down a path of just exploring some of your own personal growth and some of the lessons that you have learned as we sort of wind this to a successful conclusion.
Sure. So, I think, when I look at some of the best lessons I've learned that have been reinforced over time, it's going to sound like a cliche, but it often is relationships with people, and that's inside and outside the company, and that relationship has to be fostered and built up around trust. That's no surprise, I think, to anybody. But how do you gain that trust? Obviously, your say-do ratio has to be there. That's kind of a show starter. But when it comes to really building trust, it's also being able to communicate, continuing that theme, in a way that garners trust and is clear and concise. When I look at changes that I've had to live through in my career. For example, going through, major leadership changes or ownership changes that just inherently drive a culture change because, ownership and brand, we went through a major brand and ownership change here at TKE. That requires navigation, in a lot of levels. And we did it all around the pandemic or during the pandemic too, just to add some more flavor to the change. And I reflect on, now coming out of the pandemic, thankfully, our new ownership in place, our brands in place, we're rocking and rolling now with our new culture, and it's exciting. But for the last 2 years, it's been a lot of uncertainty, and that's normal. And I look back, and I was talking to my dad about this, just reflecting on things. Recently about, why do I feel good when I go into a situation of change, even if it's a very uncertain change, not something that's necessarily directly positive, but I look at it from a positive light. And for me, I had an opportunity to work for GE for 15 years. And GE was a large organization, very professional organization, and I got to observe and see people and leadership operate. Whether I was in the meetings or in the pre-meetings, I was able to see senior leaders operate, and I was able to grow and learn from them. I had incredible mentors, both formally and informally, and I still to this day seek out and look for mentors. Stephen, you're one of them, right? And I think that as I look back towards what I've done in my career and what successes I've had, it's because I've been able to observe or be mentored by those types of people. And it manifests itself in what I kind of articulate as relationship capability, which, again, is all based on a foundation of communication and trust.
First of all, I got shivers in my spine because, I hadn't considered myself as that. I consider every person and professional that I know, like you, and sort of like my work friends, right, who have taught me tremendously. I find every one of these podcasts, as I have learned. This is my second round of podcasting over the last several years. But this is almost like it's a little anthropology, and it's a little bit of research, and it's a little bit of like just-in-time discovery that we never even thought we were going to have. And these are just sort of subcurrents that run through our minds. And when I pick some things out, and you talk about trust and communication and things like that, and then I think about, they talk about the word trust on the PowerPoint and then communication on the PowerPoint, and people, so yeah, I understand that, but how do I go from where I am to where I need to be? And you sort of need some kind of a strategy, and sometimes the strategy is hastened through the relationships that you have and the work that you do and the results you obtain, and everything helps you inch up a little bit further in your career. And I think I can't even express gratitude enough for a person like you really taking time to talk with us about some of these really important things. And we've driven it into something that sounds simple and perhaps easier to implement. And I think because the core of this is about business acumen, which is sort of this portfolio of things, of behaviors and skills and experiences that are compounded for us as business people and emerging leaders, or even leaders who are really, trying to up their game. But to me is great. And for that, I am grateful, thankful that you've been able to share this. And I'm hoping that our listeners and our viewers will really benefit from some of these things. So thank you, Jon. And thank you, everybody, for listening and for watching. And we'll see you next time for another episode of Masters of Business. I'm Stephen Haines.
You've been listening to Masters of Business with Stephen Haines, a podcast that captures the ideas and lessons learned from thinkers and leaders in business. If you'd like to take your company to the next level, consider the courses and books from the Business Acumen Institute. To learn more, go to business-acumen.com.